telling lies on the mic just to make their flows tight on tracks. I'm pure fire and they consequence. I'm Ghost Rider, yeah, we both rap, I suppose. But once I get in my element, we seem to diabolically oppose like we're isotopes. I am woke, wise one spoke, mine's a gyroscope. You got fire, I'm a hydrant, bro. Who's the illest with lyrics? Ears bleed when they choose to listen. Slept on with bedridden riddance and flow easily like drunken pissing. Metaphors and twisted jargon. So many whack rappers this year. I'm here for it, used to clear like a macro bargain. Hey guys, Balisa here today. As I promised, I've brought you guys part 2 of my dynamic document generation solution using Automation Anywhere A2019 Community Edition. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. But before I actually show you the back end of my bot, there's a couple of definitions that I'd like to get out of the way. So the first one is batch files, right? So batch files are pretty much scripts that you can write on Microsoft Windows. I remember writing these as far back as Windows 95, I think. But basically, batch files allow you to put a series of commands that can be interpreted or run line by line, right? Batch files can also be stored in a plain text file. And also how this works is obviously cmd.exe reads these line by line and executes those tasks, right? Which brings me to PowerShell. So PowerShell, well, first time I worked with PowerShell, I remember I used to manage servers as an intern at NetSurit. I used to use PowerShell a lot for a lot of more complex scenarios where I could perhaps back up an Outlook, or an Exchange server archive using PowerShell for a couple of users. But basically, PowerShell is a Microsoft framework that allows you to do some sort of task automation, using the command line shell. So it almost sounds like batching, but a bit more powerful, right? It's also a scripting language. So with PowerShell, you can do things like loops. You can declare variables and call methods. Recently, I did a POC where I was able to integrate into SAP Ariba using the web service through PowerShell. And obviously with PowerShell, you can automate batch processes. The last definition that I'll just run you guys through is a macro. So macro, fun fact, is short for macro instruction. That's the original term for it, but it's basically an instruction that it obviously automatically expands it to a set of instructions to perform a particular task. So a lot of you are usually familiar with macros running inside of Microsoft Excel. So as you can guess, these are built into computer programs. So Office is a usual suspect for having macros. You can have them in Word, Excel, PowerPoint as well, and also other pieces of software like Notepad++. But one thing you'll notice with any piece of software where you see a macro is that you have the ability to record. Okay, so moving on, here's a fun fact. RPA, or robotics process automation, has been around longer than you think, right? So what I mean by that is RPA, if you look at not just my definitions of what batch files are, as well as PowerShell, obviously some sort of task automation. But if you actually go into your Windows as an example, right, and you just press start. Let me just shift my screen quickly to here. So if you go to start and you type in task, you'll see that there's a little program called the task scheduler. So this is obviously built into Windows, and with this you can create some tasks, right? So where you'll see the similarity with RPA is with the following. So we've got things like general, where you can give your task a name as well as a description. You can also specify a location. You'll see that you can also do things like have the task run whether the user's logged in or not, right? It does sound a bit familiar. Think of auto login in A2019. And then you can also do things like elevating the privileges of that task. So you can run it as an administrator, and then you can go as far as hiding that task. But hey, look over here, we have things like triggers, right? So if you look at most RPA tools, they also leverage things like triggers. So you can have this on a schedule on this particular machine. You can also have it run on certain triggers, like when the person logs in, or when the computer is starting up, or perhaps when it's idle, or when it's locked to unlock. And then as you can see, you can also do things like repeating the task, and you can also terminate that task if it runs longer than it's supposed to. And then just looking at other elements that might seem quite familiar to you guys is that we've also got actions. So now that we've created this task, we've set the trigger as to when this task should run, we can obviously go ahead and start adding our actions. Similar terminology. So like I said, RPA has been around for a really long time, and you can obviously see things like sending an email, which has deprecated in parentheses. But as you can see over here, you can easily do similar things to what most tools provide out there, right? You can also do things like adding an attachment as part of that email, and specifying how you're going to be sending that email by specifying things like the SMTP server and so forth. And then obviously when it comes to doing more advanced stuff, you also have the ability to put in conditions, right? So these are your if else type of conditions. Obviously you can't do advanced stuff like having stages and so forth. And then lastly, you can have things like having the task run on demand, right? So somebody can trigger that task manually. So this sounds a lot like RPA. So this is what I meant, that RPA has been around for longer than you think, but it also means that with some of the tools available in the market right now, you can do much more advanced stuff. You can also scale out. So remember, when you're creating a task with a task scheduler, this is just on one machine. So now that that is out of the way, let's get to it, and let me run you through my bot quickly. So as you can see on my browser, I'm logged into the URL of my control room. So bear in mind that I am using Community Edition for this. And then if I quickly log in with my username and password, I can obviously view some of my bots. I can go into bot insights. If I need to do some advanced automation, I can use things like IQbot to achieve that sort of functionality. So just for the sake of this post, I'm just going to quickly go into my bots. You can see that I've got my dynamic word generation, or dynamic word document generation is what I should have actually named it. I've got that bot in there, and like what I've done is obviously I've grouped this bot into steps. So steps are the ability of grouping certain actions, makes it much easier for you to read your bot and understand the logic that you've put in there, and this works really well in conjunction with things like comments as well. So anyway, my bot has a couple of steps in there. So the first one is I open the Excel just to run you back, and then I copy the template for each Excel, and then I convert those documents to PDF, which I actually didn't show in the previous video, but I'll quickly run you through that logic right now. Obviously with A2019, both Community Edition as well as Enterprise, we're able to give you a list view as well as a flow view. So flow view allows you to actually view this graphically, and if you go into the list view, you can have your logic of your bot look pretty much like pseudocode, right? So if I switch into list, I can see what's in each and every one of those steps as well. So let me quickly run into it. So obviously first step is I open my desktop file, which is the Excel, which has all of my applicants, and then notice that I've given this a name, well, a session name, right? So I've called it default. So this allows me to go back in my bot and open a particular session. So you can open one Excel or you can open 50 Excels, but as long as they all have unique session names, you can query data from any of those Excels at any given point in time. And then this is pretty simple. I just want to read the data in my Excel, and I've also mentioned that the sheet has a header as well, right? Just to make it possible to read the data that I need. The next step in my bot is obviously, let me just switch into the flow view. I've got a loop in here that I've put in there. So using that same session that I spoke about in my first step, I actually tell my bot to iterate through each row in my worksheet. So the great thing about this is obviously when we use a variable, right, to get that data, this almost works like what we used to call a multi-dimensional array in programming. I believe probably the term is still the same right now, but where you can basically query a large set of data and have different columns and rows as well. So I've got a little variable over here called var employee record. I do use a naming convention with most of my stuff, so var reminds me that this is a variable, and then in here I'm basically telling the bot to loop through all of my data in the Excel. And then what I've got in this loop obviously is a file copy. So what I do is for each record in my Excel, I actually create a copy of the template that I'll use for those job offers. So you're probably wondering, how does my bot know how many records to create a copy for? Great thing is that this loop action actually handles that all for you, right? And then because it does that as well, because I'm copying my file, right, you'll see that in here where I've specified the destination of my file, I actually reference that employee record that I talked about, which is pretty much like a multi-dimensional array. You'll notice that here in parentheses I've got what we call an index, right? So for each record, I basically tell the Excel to go into each column, right, for that to each row for that particular column, and actually create a unique document name. So what I actually mean by that, just to visually show you, is if I just go into my Excel here, I'm just going to shift my screen for you guys so you can see this clearly. So I've got my examples folder over here. You see, so what the bot literally does is that it's going to open this applicant's Excel file, and because we're indexing at 0, this is how you determine the index, right? So if you look at this Excel at first glance, you've got a couple of columns: employee ID, title, full name, email, job title, starting date, and so forth. How these arrays work in the bot is obviously the first column will start at 0, the second column will be sequential, which will be 1, the third one will be 2, the fourth one 3, the fifth one 4, and so forth, right? So this is exactly what that number inside the variable actually means. So obviously, because we're looking at position 1, what the bot is going to do to create a unique document for each of my applicants is that it's just going to go into my Excel and use this employee ID value to create those documents. The reason why I went to that is obviously employee IDs tend to be unique. You didn't have 2 employees with the same employee ID in most companies, else it wouldn't make sense. It would be difficult to keep track of people. So anyway, going back to my bot, obviously we know where all of our columns are, and we can obviously use our record variable to make sure that we get all of our data. So which brings me to the next step. I've just added a comment to let myself know that when I use this MS Word insert text, I'm actually inserting the employee title. So if you look at this action, this is an action that you can find here on the right hand side. I believe it's under Word Actions. So if I just scroll down, let me just quickly look for MS Word perhaps. So here under MS Word, you can see that with Community Edition, we can add paragraphs, we can create a document, we can insert text. So I'm actually using the insert text action, and what that allows you to do is obviously use a bookmark within Word to insert particular text. So bookmarks in Word allow you to put a position in a document, and you can always use hyperlinks as well as do snazzy things like what I'm doing over here to actually insert text at that particular position. And obviously, how do I know which document to insert text for? If you look here in this path, I obviously use again that same variable, and I specify that particular record. And because this all runs in a loop, it's going to do that for me dynamically for each and every single document. And then just to give you an idea on how I configured those bookmarks, what I'm going to quickly do is that I'm just going to open the actual template, which is the stock M file. So obviously a doc M file means that it's macro enabled. So if you guys remember, macros are little tasks that you can run within a program, right? I'll explain that a bit later. So if you look at my document, you'll see these square brackets. This is actually something that I've enabled within my Microsoft Word, so I can see where my bookmarks are. So when I print this document, obviously I won't see those square brackets, right? So just to give an idea, if I go in here and I say print, you'll see in the preview you won't see the square brackets. So this is something that I've enabled in Word. And in case you're wondering how to enable bookmarks in Word, all you simply do is you click on File, then you go into Options over here, and then if we scroll down to Advanced, you'll see that under the option for display, for the option for show document content, there's this checkbox where you can show bookmarks. So if I uncheck that, I won't see those square brackets. But if I go back and I click on options and I go into advanced, and then again under display or under show document content, I click on show bookmarks, I can see my bookmarks. So I made that easier for myself to insert bookmarks. And then just to talk a bit more about the bookmarks, obviously this is standard Word functionality. All you do is you click on insert, you click on the bookmark, and because I've already added these, obviously these bookmarks are available for me to navigate to as well as edit. So if I click on any of these bookmarks, you can see where exactly they are in my Word document. So as you can see, what I've done is I've put each of my bookmarks where they're supposed to be. So the address, etc., the job title over here, and the starting date. And you guys are probably wondering, how did I, in my previous video, allow some of my data to appear dynamically? So for example, the full names of the person, I have them appear somewhere here, as well as right after this word that says dear. So for that, I'm using fields within Word. So to enable that feature, or to actually see your field codes rather, what you do is you press Alt F9, and then as you can see over here, I've got a field code to reference my employee full names, right? So you'll see hyperlinks will also have some sort of field code, and again I've got this similar field code over here. And then obviously if I go ahead and I edit this field, what I've literally done is I've just told it to reference my bookmark where I've got my full name. So that's how you do the formula as well. So if I just go in here, you can see my full my formula for that. And then obviously if you don't want to see your field codes again, you press Alt and F9. So that's disabled on Word. And then that's pretty much how I got this to work dynamically. And then just to show you the results again, in case you missed part 1, if I open any of these documents, let's say 1233 as an example, you can see that there's my dynamic content, right, that the bot has put in. But where I've got some of my field codes, I first have to enable content by kicking off this macro, and then over here you can see my full names being displayed again. So going back to my template, so I'm not going to save this. One last thing that I'd like to mention is, obviously to have the macro enabled, you need to enable developer tools in Word. So it will allow you to have this developer tab, and then in here you can view your macros. So I've got a macro for when I open and close my document, just for it to update those field codes. So if I open this macro called auto open and I edit that, you'll see that I used a little bit of code just to say update all of my fields at print and update all of my links at print. So I update both fields and links because I do use hyperlinks in my document in the form of bookmarks, right? And then that's pretty much all that I do. So these are the two subroutines that I've put in there. And then for guys who don't know how to enable developer options within Word, you need to go into File, and then I believe that you go into Options over here, and then what you do is you go to your customize ribbon option, and then just make sure that developer is checked over here, and this will allow you to write a little bit of code using macros and do all sorts of fancy stuff. And that's all. I'll wrap it up for today. I will be doing part 3 to continue this blog series. I'm just trying to keep it nice and short, just to make sure that you guys do pay attention, and I hope that this has helped somebody out there. Thank you.